Barron Trump, the towering young heir to the Trump legacy, steps into the spotlight on a day that will go down as one of the most jaw-dropping, hilarious, and downright incredible moments ever witnessed. Something amazing happens, something so wild, so unexpected, that it leaves the world buzzing with shock and awe. But what exactly went down? The details are coming, and trust me, they're worth the wait. Picture this: a sleek, modern studio in the heart of New York City, its glass walls reflecting the chaos of the bustling streets below. The cameras hum to life, the lights blaze, and the audience, hundreds strong, settles into their seats, their anticipation thick enough to cut with a knife. Barron Trump, all 6'9" of him, strides onto the set with a quiet confidence that radiates power. His sharp suit, tailored to perfection, catches the light, and his presence fills the room like a storm about to break. This isn't just another interview. This is a battlefield, and Barron knows it. Across from him sits the Zelensky fan, a wiry, smug figure with a mop of unkempt hair and a smirk that screams trouble. This guy's no stranger to stirring the pot. Known for his loud, obnoxious takes on social media, he's built a following by worshipping Ukrainian politician Volodymyr Zelensky and trashing anyone who doesn't bow to his idol. Today, he's got his sights set on Barron Trump, the youngest son of Donald Trump, a kid who's grown into a giant, literally and figuratively, in the public eye. The Zelensky fan thinks he's about to pull off the ultimate humiliation, a viral moment that'll cement his status as a progressive hero. He's wrong, dead wrong. The air crackles with tension as the cameras roll, capturing every second of what's about to unfold. The audience senses it too. A mix of excitement and unease ripples through the crowd. This isn't going to be polite chit-chat. This is war. The studio itself is a marvel, all glass and steel perched high above the city like a throne. The lights overhead cast a harsh glow, illuminating the set in a way that makes every movement, every expression impossible to miss. Barron sits, legs crossed casually, his massive frame somehow making the plush chair look small. His face is calm, almost serene, but there's a glint in his eyes, a sharpness that hints at the storm brewing beneath the surface. Zelensky fan, meanwhile, leans forward, elbows on the table, his posture screaming aggression. He's got a stack of notes in front of him, scribbled with what he thinks are killer zingers, traps to spring on Barron. The guy's practically vibrating with glee, convinced he's about to dismantle the Trump legacy in one fell swoop. The audience shifts, some whispering to each other, others gripping their seats. They've seen this kind of ambush before, but something feels different today. Something big is coming. It starts innocently enough. The Zelensky fan kicks things off with a syrupy greeting, his voice dripping with fake warmth. He thanks Barron for showing up, tossing in a backhanded compliment about how brave it is for someone so young to face the spotlight. The crowd catches the condescension immediately, and a few eyes roll. Barron doesn't flinch. He nods, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, like he's already 3 steps ahead. The fan launches into small talk, questions about Barron's life, his interests, his time playing basketball at school. Barron answers smoothly, his deep voice steady, mentioning his love for sports and his quiet dedication to his studies. The audience nods, impressed by his poise. He's not the spoiled rich kid they expected. He's something else, something more. But then the tone shifts. The Zelensky fan's smile tightens, his eyes narrowing as he pivots to his real agenda. He starts poking at Barron's family, his upbringing, the wealth and privilege that come with the Trump name. The questions get sharper, laced with sarcasm. He brings up Donald Trump's recent clash with Zelensky, the Ukrainian leader his guest idolizes, and smirks as he asks how Barron feels about his dad bullying such a heroic figure. The crowd stirs, sensing the bait. This is it, the moment the Zelensky fan thinks he's got Barron cornered. He's counting on the kid to stumble, to get flustered, to give him the soundbite he needs to go viral. But Barron doesn't take the bait. He leans back, his posture relaxed, and fixes the fan with a stare that could freeze lava. The room holds its breath. The trap is set, but who's really about to fall into it? The studio lights burn brighter as the Zelensky fan ramps up his attack, his voice rising with a mix of glee and venom. He's got Barron Trump in his crosshairs, and he's loving every second of it. The audience leans forward, caught in the gravitational pull of the escalating tension. This guy's not here to chat. He's here to destroy. He starts throwing out accusations disguised as questions, each one sharper than the last. He asks Barron how it feels to grow up in a family that thrives on controversy, his tone dripping with mockery. He digs into the Trump-Zelensky drama, painting Donald as a villain and Zelensky as a saint, practically glowing as he waxes poetic about his hero's courage. The crowd shifts uncomfortably. Some buy into the narrative, others smell the bias a mile away. But the Zelensky fan doesn't care. He's got a script and he's sticking to it. He leans closer, his eyes glinting with malice, and starts hammering Barron with loaded jabs. He questions whether Barron's ever had to work for anything, implying his whole life's been handed to him on a silver platter. The audience murmurs, some nod in agreement, others frown, sensing the cheap shot. The fan doesn't stop there. He pivots to Barron's height, turning it into a snide dig about how even his growth spurt must have been bought. It's a low blow, and he knows it, grinning as he waits for Barron to crack. The studio feels like a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation. This is the Zelensky fan's moment, or so he thinks. He's got the cameras, the audience, the narrative all lined up for his big win. But Barron doesn't crack. He doesn't even blink. The kid, barely out of his teens, sits there like a mountain, unshaken, his face a mask of calm. The Zelensky fan's words bounce off him like pebbles off a tank. Then slowly, Barron tilts his head just enough to catch the light, and the faintest hint of a smile plays on his lips. It's not a nervous smile. It's a predator's smile. The audience catches it, and a ripple of unease spreads through the room. The fan, too caught up in his own performance, misses the warning sign. He keeps going, doubling down with a smirk, asking Barron if he's proud of his dad's attacks on Zelensky, a man who's fighting for freedom. He's fishing for anger, for a slip-up, for anything he can twist into a gotcha moment. That's when Barron strikes. His voice cuts through the noise like a blade, deep, steady, and laced with a quiet power that silences the room. He doesn't yell. He doesn't need to. He starts by addressing the height jab, turning it into a masterstroke of deflection. He mentions how he's used his size to dominate on the basketball court, earning every point through sweat and skill, not handouts. The audience perks up, some even chuckle, appreciating the subtle flex. Then he pivots to the family questions, his tone sharpening. He talks about growing up watching his dad fight for what he believes in, taking hits from people like this fan who'd rather tear down than build up. The crowd's murmurs grow louder, some cheer, others shift awkwardly. Barron's not just defending himself, he's rewriting the script. The Zelensky fan falters, his smirk flickering as Barron keeps going. The kid's not flustered, he's in control. He brings up how his family's faced endless scrutiny, yet they've never backed down, never stopped pushing forward. He doesn't mention Zelensky by name, but he doesn't have to. The dig at the fans' obsession is clear. The room's energy shifts hard. The audience, once split, starts tilting toward Barron, drawn in by his unshakable confidence. The fan's notes sit untouched now, his plan unraveling faster than he can process. He tries to interrupt, but Barron's voice rolls over him, steady and relentless. This isn't a stumble. This is a steamroll. The Zelensky fan swung big and missed bigger. The studio's atmosphere crackles like a live wire as Barron Trump takes the reins, flipping the Zelensky fan's ambush into a spectacle of his own making. The fan's face tightens, his confidence crumbling under the weight of Barron's unflinching gaze. The kid's not just holding his own, he's dominating, and everyone knows it. The audience, once restless, now hangs on his every word, their earlier skepticism giving way to awe. The cameras zoom in, catching the sweat beading on the fan's forehead, the way his hands fidget with his useless notes. Barron, meanwhile, looks like he was born for this, tall, composed, a titan in a tailored suit. The contrast couldn't be starker. Barron digs deeper, his voice steady but carrying an edge that slices through the fan's bravado. He starts talking about loyalty, how it's something the Zelensky fan wouldn't understand, obsessed as he is with a foreign politician he's never met. The jab lands hard and the crowd reacts. Some laugh, others gasp, but all feel the burn. Barron doesn't stop there. He paints a picture of his life, not as some pampered prince, but as a kid who's had to navigate a world of constant judgment, always under a microscope because of his last name. He talks about the strength it takes to stand tall, literally and figuratively, when people like this fan try to drag you down. The audience eats it up, their cheers growing louder with every word. The Zelensky fan squirms, his earlier swagger replaced by a desperate scramble to regain control. He tries to pivot, tossing out a weak jab about Barron's privileged education, but it's too late. Barron's already got the room in his grip. He counters effortlessly, mentioning how he's worked hard in school, how he's earned his grades through late nights and focus, not just his name. Then he turns the knife, pointing out how the fan spent years hiding behind a keyboard, worshipping a guy halfway across the world instead of building anything of his own. The crowd erupts, claps, shouts, even a few whistles. The fan's face flushes red, his notes now a crumpled mess in his hands. He's not just losing, he's imploding. Barron leans forward now, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table, and delivers the knockout blow. He talks about his dad not as a politician but as a father. He describes late-night talks, lessons about resilience, moments of quiet pride that never make the headlines. He contrasts that with the fans' blind devotion to Zelensky, a man who's become a symbol for people too lazy to question the hype. The audience roars, some standing, their applause shaking the studio walls. The Zelensky fan shrinks in his seat, his smirk long gone, replaced by a look of pure defeat. Barron's not just humiliated him, he's exposed him, stripped away the bravado and left him bare for the world to see. The lights seem brighter now, the camera's tighter on the scene as Barron sits back, his point made. The fan mutters something incoherent, a last-ditch effort to save face, but it's drowned out by the crowd's reaction. The room's energy is electric, a tidal wave of support crashing over Barron. He doesn't gloat, he doesn't need to. His victory's written in the fan's slumped shoulders, the way the audience hangs on his every move. This wasn't just a win. This was a demolition, a masterclass in turning the tables. The Zelensky fan came to shame Barron Trump and walked away the fool. And the best part, the world's watching and they can't look away. The studio pulses with raw energy as Barron Trump sits, a colossus in the chaos, his victory from the last round still reverberating through the room. The audience's applause lingers like an echo, a thunderous testament to the kid's unshakable command of the moment. The lights overhead blaze relentlessly, casting long shadows across the sleek glass set, their harsh glow reflecting off the polished table between Barron and his floundering opponent. The Zelensky fan, once a picture of smug assurance, now looks like a man clinging to the edge of a sinking ship. His hair's a mess, strands sticking to his sweaty forehead, and his hands tremble slightly as he fumbles with his crumpled notes. The cameras catch every twitch, every bead of perspiration, zooming in mercilessly on his unraveling composure. This is no longer an interview, it's a public execution, and Barron's the one holding the axe. The fan knows he's losing. The crowd turned against him, their cheers for Barron a deafening roar that drowns out his every move. He can feel the weight of their judgment, the way their eyes bore into him, once curious, now scornful. He'd come here to bury Barron Trump, to drag the young giant down into the mud of humiliation, and walk away a hero to his Zelensky-worshipping followers. But the plans backfired spectacularly, and panic sets in. His chest heaves as he sucks in a ragged breath, his mind racing for a way to claw back control. He can't let this end here, not with Barron standing tall, not with the world watching. So he doubles down, launching a desperate counterattack, his voice rising in a frantic pitch as he tries to reclaim the narrative. He starts with a wild swing, accusing Barron of hiding behind his family's name, claiming the kid's nothing without the Trump empire propping him up. The words spill out fast, almost tripping over each other, as he paints a picture of Barron as a spoiled brat coasting on privilege. He drags up old tabloid stories, half-truths, and outright lies, about the Trump fortune, about Barron's private schooling, about the cushy life he supposedly led. The audience stirs, a few heads nodding as the fans' words tap into lingering resentment, the kind that festers in people who have never met a Trump but hate them anyway. He pushes harder, his tone growing shrill, questioning whether Barron's ever faced a real challenge, ever scraped by without a safety net. It's a cheap shot, broad and sloppy, but he's banking on it sticking, on stirring enough doubt to shift the tide. Then he pivots to Zelensky, his idol, his lifeline in this crumbling mess. He waxes poetic about the Ukrainian leader's grit, his defiance, his real struggles against impossible odds. The comparison's clear. Zelensky's a warrior, Barron's a fraud. The fans' eyes light up with a manic gleam as he rants, his hands waving wildly, spit flying as he hammers the point home. He calls Barron a towering symbol of entitlement, a jab at his height that's meant to sting, meant to draw blood. The crowd's reaction splits. Some boo, others lean forward, hooked by the audacity of the attack. The studio feels like a pressure cooker again, the air thick with conflict, the lights glaring down like a spotlight on a boxing ring. The Zelensky fan grins, a shaky, manic thing, convinced he's landed a hit, convinced he's turned it around. But Barron doesn't budge. The kid's a statue, his massive frame rooted to the chair, his face an unreadable mask. The fans' words crash against him like waves on a cliff, loud, messy, but ultimately powerless. The audience watches, breath held, as Barron lets the rant play out, giving the fan just enough rope to hang himself. Then slowly, deliberately, Barron shifts. He uncrosses his legs, plants both feet flat on the floor, and leans forward, his shadow stretching across the table like a storm cloud. The move's subtle, but it's seismic. The room feels it, the cameras catch it, the fan freezes mid-sentence. Barron's eyes lock onto his opponent's, cold and piercing, and the temperature in the studio seems to drop 10 degrees. What comes next is surgical. Barron dismantles the attack piece by piece, his voice a low rumble that fills the space, steady and unrelenting. He starts with the privilege angle, turning it on its head. He talks about growing up in a fishbowl, every move dissected, every mistake magnified, a life where privacy's a myth and judgment's a constant. He describes the weight of the Trump name, not as a golden ticket, but as a target, a bullseye painted on his back since he was a kid. The audience quiets, drawn in by the raw honesty, the way he strips away the fans' cartoonish caricature. He mentions late nights studying, early mornings training, moments of doubt he pushed through, not because he had to, but because he wanted to prove something to himself. Then he goes for the jugular. He doesn't touch Zelensky directly, why bother? But he tears into the fans' obsession, calling it a sad little fantasy built on tweets and headlines, not reality. He questions what the fan, ever done, ever built, ever fought for beyond screaming into the void about a guy he'll never meet. The crowd erupts, laughter, cheers, a wave of sound that crashes over the set. The fan's grin vanishes, his face paling as Barron keeps going, relentless, exposing the hollowness of the attack. The kid's not just defending himself, he's rewriting the story, turning the fan into the punchline. The studio shakes with the audience's reaction, their applause a tidal wave, and the Zelensky fan slumps defeated, his counterattack a smoldering wreck at Barron's feet. The dust settles from the Zelensky fans' failed counterattack, but the studio's far from calm. The air hums with a restless energy, the audience buzzing, their eyes locked on Barron Trump as he sits, a towering figure radiating quiet power. The lights overhead pulse like a heartbeat, their glow bouncing off the glass walls, amplifying the intensity of the moment. The Zelensky fan's a shell of himself now, slumped in his chair, his notes scattered like confetti from a losing parade. His earlier bravado's gone, replaced by a jittery unease, his fingers tapping nervously on the table as he searches for an escape that isn't coming. The cameras linger on him for a moment, capturing the sweat, the defeat, before swinging back to Barron, the real story here, the kid who's turned this ambush into a coronation. Barron could coast now, ride the wave of the crowd's adoration and call it a day. But he doesn't. He's not done. The audience senses it, their chatter fading into a hush as he shifts again, his massive hands resting on the table, his posture opening up. There's a change in his eyes, something softer, something real, and it catches everyone off guard. He's been a wall of steel so far, deflecting every jab, crushing every attack, but now he peels back the armor, just enough to let them see inside. The room leans in, captivated, as Barron starts talking about something deeper, something personal, something that flips the script entirely. This isn't about winning anymore, it's about revealing who he is. He begins with his family, his voice softening but never wavering, a steady current that pulls the audience along. He talks about his mom, Melania, the quiet strength she's always shown, the way she taught him to stand tall, not just physically, but in spirit. He paints a picture of late-night conversations in their sprawling home, her accent lilting as she told him stories of her own journey, her own fights. He describes his dad, Donald, not as the brash figure the world knows, but as the guy who'd sit with him after a tough day, offering blunt advice and fierce pride. The audience shifts, some nodding, others blinking back unexpected tears. Barron stripping away the headlines, showing them a side of the Trumps they've never seen. Then he digs deeper, his words carrying a weight that fills the studio. He talks about growing up under a spotlight he didn't choose, a kid thrust into a world of cameras and critics before he could even spell his own name. He recalls moments of doubt, times he wondered if he'd ever be more than Donald Trump's son, times he felt the sting of being judged for things he couldn't control. The Zelensky fan tries to smirk, sensing a crack, but it's a mistake. Barron's not breaking, he's building. He describes pushing through those doubts, finding strength in sports, in school, in the quiet moments when he'd stare out over the city and promise himself he'd make his own mark. The crowd's silent now, hanging on every word, their earlier cheers replaced by a reverent stillness. The emotional core hits hardest when Barron pivots to loyalty, not the blind kind the fan clings to, but the real, messy human kind. He talks about watching his parents weather storms, attacks from people like this guy, people who'd rather tear down than understand. He mentions sacrifices they made, nights they shielded him from the worst of it, all so he could grow up strong. His voice thickens slightly just for a moment and the audience feels it, a ripple of connection, a shared ache. He contrasts that with the fans' obsession, calling it a hollow shrine to a stranger, a cheap imitation of what family really means. The jab lands like a thunderclap, and the crowd roars back to life, their applause shaking the glass walls. The Zelensky fan flinches, his hands clenching, but he's got nothing left to throw. Barron's laid himself bare, not as a victim, but as a fighter, and it's a move the fan can't counter. The kid's not just tall, he's deep, a well of strength and heart that dwarfs the fans' shallow antics. The studio's a cauldron now, the audience on their feet, some wiping their eyes, others shouting Barron's name. The cameras catch it all, the fans' defeat, Barron's triumph, the raw emotion spilling over. This isn't just a win anymore. It's a revelation and the world's watching, stunned, as Barron Trump proves he's more than a name. He's a force. The studio's a volcano now, erupting with the audience's fervor as Barron Trump stands at the center of it all, a giant in every sense. The lights blaze hotter, their glare bouncing off the glass and steel, turning the set into a shimmering arena where Barron reigns supreme. The Zelensky fan's a broken figure across from him, his chair creaking under the weight of his defeat, his hands limp on the table, his notes a useless pile of scribbled desperation. The cameras dart between them, capturing the stark divide. Barron, tall and steady, a pillar of quiet power. The fan, small and shrinking, a man who's lost everything he came for. The crowd's on their feet, a sea of faces lit with awe, their cheers a relentless wave that crashes over the scene. This isn't just a moment, it's a movement, and Barron's the one leading it. The kid doesn't bask in it, though. He doesn't need to. His victory's written in the fans' hunched shoulders, in the way the audience hangs on his every breath. He leans back slightly, his massive frame filling the chair, and lets the room settle, giving them a moment to catch up to what they've just witnessed. The Zelensky fan tries to rally, his voice cracking as he mutters something about Trump propaganda, a last-ditch fling at relevance. It's weak, pitiful, and the crowd drowns it out with boos, their disdain a palpable force. The fans' eyes dart to the audience, wide and frantic, but there's no lifeline there, just a wall of rejection, a jury that's already ruled against him. Barron picks up where he left off, his voice a deep current that pulls everyone back in. He talks about legacy, not the kind you inherit, but the kind you build. He describes the lessons his dad drilled into him. Work hard, stand firm, don't let the noise define you. He paints a vivid scene, Donald Trump in a cluttered office, papers strewn everywhere, barking orders but pausing to ask Barron about his day. He mentions Melania again, her elegance a shield, her wisdom a guide, the way she'd tell him to ignore the haters and focus on what matters. The audience nods, some clapping spontaneously, drawn into the intimacy of it, the humanity behind the headlines. Then he turns the lens outward, his words sharpening as he zeroes in on the fan. He doesn't name Zelensky, why dignify the obsession? But he dissects the mindset, the emptiness of chasing a hero you'll never know. He calls it a second-hand life, a stinging phrase that lands like a slap. The crowd roars, their laughter cutting deeper than any insult. The fans' face twists, a mix of rage and shame, but he's got no rebuttal. Barron stripped him bare, left him exposed as a hollow shell. The kid keeps going, talking about real stakes, family, country, the things worth fighting for, not some distant figure on a pedestal. The contrast is brutal, and the audience feels it, their cheers swelling into a deafening tide. The studio shakes with their reaction, the glass walls trembling as the crowd crowns Barron the victor, not just of this fight, but of something bigger. He's not just Donald Trump's son anymore. He's Barron, a name that stands on its own. The Zelensky fan slumps further, his head dipping, his hands covering his face as the reality sinks in. He came to shame Barron and lost everything, his credibility, his swagger, his shot at glory. The cameras linger on him, a fallen warrior in a war he started, while Barron sits tall, the calm at the storm's center. The moment stretches, the audience's energy a living thing, their voices blending into a chant. Barron's name over and over, a sound that echoes beyond the studio, out into the city, into the world. The lights flare one last time, the cameras pull back, and the scene locks into place. Barron triumphant, the fan crushed, the crowd wild. This isn't just a win, it's a reckoning, a story that'll be replayed, retweeted, remembered. The Zelensky fan gambled big and lost bigger, and Barron Trump walked away a king. The studio's a crucible now, molten with the heat of the moment, the air thick with the scent of sweat and anticipation. Barron Trump sits like a king on a throne, his towering frame dominating the set, the lights overhead casting him in a golden glow that makes him look almost mythic. The glass walls tremble faintly with the audience's restless energy, their cheers still echoing from the last round, a tidal wave of sound that refuses to die down. Across the table, the Zelensky fan is a wreck, his shirt damp with perspiration, his hair plastered to his skull, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. The cameras zoom in on him, merciless, catching the quiver in his lip, the way his hands clutch the table's edge as if it's the only thing keeping him upright. He's down, battered, but not out, not yet. He's got one last card to play, and he's about to throw it with everything he's got left. The crowd senses the shift, their murmurs rising as the fan straightens, a flicker of defiance sparking in his sunken eyes. He knows he's lost the room, knows his dream of humiliating Barron Trump has crumbled into dust, but desperation fuels him now. He can't leave this stage a loser, not after all the hype, not with his followers watching, waiting for him to deliver the viral moment he promised. So he launches his final gambit, a reckless, all-or-nothing assault meant to drag Barron down with him. His voice cracks as he starts, but it steadies into a shrill, venomous pitch, cutting through the studio's hum. He accuses Barron of being a puppet, a hollow shell propped up by his father's legacy, a kid with no spine of his own. The words are jagged, meant to wound, meant to provoke. He doesn't stop there. He drags up Donald Trump's clash with Zelensky again, twisting it into a grotesque caricature. Barron's dad as a bully, a tyrant, a man who'd crush anyone in his path, and Barron as his silent accomplice, complicit in every sin. The fan's hands flail, his gestures wild, as he paints Barron as a coward hiding behind wealth, a fraud who'd collapse without the Trump machine. He throws in a personal dig, calling Barron's basketball skills bought, his height a freak accident. That's all he's got going for him. The audience gasps, some boo, others lean forward, hooked by the sheer audacity of the attack. The Zelensky fan's eyes gleam with a manic intensity, his breath ragged as he pivots to his idol, praising Zelensky's real courage in a voice that borders on worship. He's betting everything on this, hopping to ignite a spark of doubt, to claw back some shred of dignity. The studio feels like it's holding its breath, the tension a living thing, coiling tighter with every word. The lights flare, the cameras swing between the fan's frantic energy and Barron's stillness, a contrast so stark it's almost cinematic. The crowd split, some jeer the fan, their disdain a low rumble, while others watch Barron, waiting for the crack, the stumble, the moment he proves the fan right. But Barron doesn't move. He doesn't flinch. He sits there, a mountain of calm, his hands folded casually, his face a mask of quiet strength. The fans' words batter against him, a storm raging against a fortress, and they don't leave a mark. The audience sees it, the way his eyes narrow just slightly, the faint twitch of his lips, and they know what's coming. The fan's gambit isn't just failing, it's about to blow up in his face. Barron waits, letting the rant run its course, giving the fan every inch of rope he needs to hang himself. Then he strikes, his voice a deep, resonant force that rolls through the studio like thunder. He starts with the puppet accusation, dismantling it with surgical precision. He talks about carving his own path, hours on the court, nights hunched over books, moments when he could have coasted but chose to push harder. He describes the Trump name not as a crutch, but as a challenge, a legacy he's had to live up to, not lean on. The audience leans in, their cheers building as he paints a picture of resilience, of a kid who's faced the world's glare and come out stronger. Then he turns to the Zelensky angle, and it's devastating. He doesn't attack the Ukrainian leader. He doesn't need to. Instead, he guts the fans' obsession, calling it a pathetic escape for someone too scared to face his own life. He contrasts it with his own reality, family dinners, tough love, real stakes, not some fantasy hero worship. The crowd erupts, their laughter a razor that slices through the fans' last shred of credibility. Barron keeps going, his words relentless, exposing the fans' attack as a tantrum, a flailing cry from a man who's got nothing left. The studio shakes with applause, the glass walls vibrating as the audience rises, their voices a wall of sound. The Zelensky fan collapses inward, his gambit a smoking ruin, and Barron stands taller than ever, untouchable, unbreakable, a titan in the wreckage. The studio's a cauldron of chaos and triumph, the air electric with the audience's fervor as Barron Trump cements his dominance. The lights pulse like a living thing, their glare bouncing off the glass walls, turning the set into a cathedral of conflict where Barron reigns supreme. The Zelensky fan's a ghost now, slumped in his chair, his head bowed, his hands limp on the table as if they've forgotten how to move. The cameras linger on him for a moment, capturing the hollow shell of a man who came to conquer and left in ruins, before swinging back to Barron, the center of gravity, the force that's reshaped the room. The crowd's on their feet, a sea of faces lit with awe, their cheers a relentless storm that shakes the foundation. This isn't just a win anymore, it's a transformation, and Barron's the architect. He could stop here, bask in the wreckage of the fans' final collapse, but Barron's not done. The audience senses it, their noise softening into a hungry hush as he shifts in his seat, his massive frame leaning forward just enough to command every eye. There's a fire in him now, a quiet intensity that burns brighter than the studio lights, and it pulls the room in like a magnet. He starts talking about legacy, not the one he was born into, but the one he's building, brick by brick, moment by moment. His voice is steady, deep, a current that flows through the chaos and anchors it, and the audience hangs on every syllable, spellbound by the shift from defense to declaration. He begins with his roots, painting a vivid picture of a life shaped by giants. His father, Donald, a man of unrelenting drive. His mother, Melania, a pillar of grace under fire. He describes growing up in their shadow not as a burden but as a forge, a place where he was tempered, tested, made strong. He talks about late nights watching his dad pace the halls of Mar-a-Lago, plotting moves, fighting battles, always pausing to check on him, to ask about his dreams. He recalls Melania's quiet lessons: stand tall, stay true, let the world rage, and the way she'd smile when he pushed past his limits. The audience nods, some wiping their eyes, others clapping softly, drawn into the intimacy of it, the raw humanity behind the Trump mythos. But Barron doesn't linger in nostalgia. He pivots, his voice sharpening as he talks about stepping out of that shadow, about claiming his own space. He describes the basketball court, sweat-soaked hours, bruised knees, the roar of a crowd when he sank a game winner, not because he had to, but because he wanted to feel the weight of his own effort. He mentions school, the grind of exams, the quiet pride of a good grade earned through sleepless nights, not favors. The crowd cheers louder, their admiration swelling as he strips away the fans' caricature of a spoiled prince and reveals a fighter, a kid who's clawed his way to this moment. Then he turns the lens on the Zelensky fan, and it's a masterstroke. He doesn't waste breath on the man's idol. Instead, he dissects the mindset, the emptiness of living through someone else's story. He calls it a borrowed life, a scathing label that lands like a hammer. The audience roars, their laughter a wave that crashes over the fan, who flinches, his head sinking lower. Barron contrasts it with his own path, real struggles, real victories, a life he shaped with his own hands. He talks about loyalty, not to a distant figure but to family, to principles, to the country he's watched his dad fight for. The studio shakes with applause, the glass walls trembling as the crowd surges to their feet, their voices blending into a chant, Barron's name, a sound that echoes beyond the set into the world. The Zelensky fan's defeat is absolute now, his body a crumpled heap, his earlier fire extinguished under the weight of Barron's words. The cameras catch it all, the fans collapse, Barron's rise, the audience's wild devotion. This isn't just about the fight anymore, it's about what Barron represents, a legacy taking shape before their eyes. He sits back, his point made, his presence a quiet storm that fills the room. The crowd crowns him not just the victor, but the future, and the Zelensky fan fades into irrelevance, a footnote in a story that's all about Barron Trump. The studio's a supernova now, exploding with the raw, uncontainable energy of a moment that's transcended the set, the city, the screen itself. Barron Trump stands at the heart of it, a towering figure bathed in the relentless glare of the lights, his suit crisp, his posture unshakable, his presence a force that bends the room around him. The glass walls shimmer, reflecting the chaos of the audience. 1,000 faces, some tear-streaked, others wide-eyed, all roaring with a primal mix of awe and adoration. The Zelensky fan's a shadow across the table, a broken man curled into himself, his head buried in his hands, his notes scattered like ashes from a lost battle. The cameras sweep the scene, capturing every angle, the fans' ruin, Barron's reign, the crowd's rapture. And the world beyond the glass feels it too, a ripple that's already spreading, unstoppable, seismic. The air's thick with the weight of what's happened, the stakes that have soared beyond a petty TV spat into something mythic. The audience knows they've witnessed history, a clash that'll be dissected, debated, replayed for years. Barron could walk away now, leave the fan in the dust and let the cheers carry him off, but he doesn't. He's got one last move, one final stroke to paint this victory into a legend, and the room holds its breath as he leans forward, his massive hands resting on the table, his eyes blazing with a quiet, unyielding fire. The lights flare brighter, the cameras tighten their focus, and the crowd falls into a reverent hush, sensing the weight of what's coming. He starts with the past, his voice a deep, resonant tide that washes over the studio, pulling everyone into its depths. He talks about being a kid in a world that never slept, cameras flashing, headlines screaming, a name that was a blessing and a curse before he could even understand it. He describes the early years, The way he'd watch his dad stride through storms of criticism, his mom shield him with a smile that hid her own scars. He paints a picture of a family forged in fire, not gold. Late nights, hard lessons, moments of doubt they turned into steel. The audience leans in, some nodding, others clutching their seats, drawn into the vulnerability, the strength beneath it. Then he shifts to the present, his words building like a crescendo. He talks about this moment, not as a fluke, but as a proving ground, a stage where he's shown the world who he is. He describes the Zelensky fans' attack, not with anger but with pity, a sad little bid for relevance that crumbled under its own weight. He doesn't linger on the fan. Instead, he lifts the lens higher, talking about what it means to stand tall, to fight for something real. He mentions the court, the classroom, the quiet nights when he'd stare at the skyline and vow to be more than a name. The crowd erupts, their cheers a thunderclap, but Barron keeps going, his voice cutting through the noise, steady and fierce. He turns to the future, and it's electric. He talks about carrying the Trump legacy forward, not as a shadow but as a torch, a flame he stoked with his own hands. He describes a vision, hard work, loyalty, a country worth fighting for, echoing his dad's grit, his mom's grace, but carved in his own image. The audience surges to their feet, their applause a tidal wave that shakes the glass, their voices a chant that drowns out everything else. Barron, Barron, Barron. The Zelensky fans invisible now, a forgotten speck in the wake of this moment, his defeat so total it's almost tragic. The cameras catch the tears in some eyes, the fists pumping in others, the raw emotion spilling over as Barron's words hit home. The studio's a cathedral of triumph as Barron sits back, his point made, his legend born. The lights pulse one last time, the cameras pull wide, and the scene locks into eternity. Barron at the center, the crowd a sea of believers, the fan a ghost of his own making. The world watches, stunned, as the kid who was supposed to fall rises instead, a giant in every way. This isn't just a win, it's a birth, a story that'll echo through time. The Zelensky fan came to shame him and left in pieces, while Barron Trump walked away a titan, a name no one will forget. The crowd chants on, the glass trembles, and somewhere beyond the set, the world shifts, forever changed by the kid who turned the tables and claimed his crown. If you enjoyed this story, check out another video with an even more amazing tale. There's always something exciting waiting for you on our channel. And don't forget, more wonderful stories are coming soon. Hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our upcoming adventures.